would you like to open your?
Yes, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the King George Tourism Advisory Committee, the meeting jointly with the King George Board of Supervisors.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baird. Next up is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak now about matters concerning the Tourism Committee or tourism-related items? Mr. Dines, is there anybody online? Thank you. For my fellow colleagues, did you have any written correspondence? For the Tourism Advisory Committee, do you have any written correspondence?
No, ma'am.
All right, thank you so much. We'll do some introductions now. Mr. Baird, can you take it off and introduce each of you and which part of tourism you represent?
Yes, I'm Bob Baird, representing the King George Historical Society.
I'm David Zabelski. I'm representing the hospitality industry with the Holiday Inn Express and the My Place.
Warren Veazey, representing the outdoor events, Vice President of the Friends of the Dog and Railroad Heritage Trail.
My name is Dee Strauss, and I represent the schools as well as King George Fall Festival.
Thank you very much. Now we go on to project specifications. I know over this, maybe last year or so, we've all been talking about how to make the Tourism Committee a little bit more productive, robust. We had a look at the charter and about how it can be made up. And one of the things we talked about was coming up with a strategic plan. I mean, since this is just a get to know work session, I'm going to go down the line of my fellow colleagues and so they can express some concerns they've had or things they like a vision. Mr. Bush.
I have no comment, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Granger?
I just think maybe some of the proposals that have come in, looking at what's been approved and what's been approved, might not necessarily be in line with the guidelines. That would be my biggest concern, making sure that when they come in, all the regulations that are needed to be followed are being followed to approve something or disapprove something. So,
Mr. Stonehill?
I don't think I have anything right now.
Thank you. Ms. Kupka?
I would second Mr. Granger's comment with regard to proposals for grant funding that are submitted to you all. We realize that you are the mechanism by which we meet the code requirement to consult the local tourism providers and professionals. We just want to make sure that when you are reviewing these applications, that they are meeting the criteria specified in the code. Thank you very much for being here and for serving on the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Kupka. One of my things, I've always wondered if we need a tourism committee, but we have one, and you guys do a good job, and you do represent your different, I'm trying to think of tourism topics, categories. But one of my questions is on, do we need the makeup of being so many members of the tourism committee? Because then it creates problems if everybody can't be there, a lot of different give and take. And when you look at the original charter, it was thought that you had to have someone for every category that is in the state statute. But as long as you have a certain amount of people representing those industries, and I think maybe a smaller, like 5 people, that's my opinion, would probably do better and work better and be more efficient. That's my comments. And I'll go down, Mr. Baird, would you like to get any?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. First, addressing your last point, as far as the size of the committee is that we're all very, very busy people, so often we have 1 or 2 people missing from the meetings anyway. So, I find typically, 4 to 6 people is the max we've ever had at a meeting, plus staff, of course. So I don't find it particularly burdensome, and the different types of input we receive from the different sectors has proven valuable from time to time. So that doesn't concern me. What has concerned me, frankly, is a little bit of confusion as to what tourism dollars come into the county and how they can be spent. We understand in concept that they need to be in support of the tourism industry and support our retail hotel vendors and so forth. But the question is in doing so, there's many ways, and we have differing opinions as to how money can be spent, whether it's purely advertising, whether it could be a one-time capital expense, whether it could be staff to aid promote tourism. We just are looking for clarification of what we can recommend, because we get all kinds of different and unique requests from people seeking grants. So we were particularly with the change in the board, we just wanted clarification of mission and clarification of, I guess, our marching orders, and what we could do.
Yeah, like Bob was saying, the biggest thing for me, and it's one of the bigger sticking points that we've seen recently with grants, is we're seeing some points for potential capital improvements where, in all honesty, it splits a lot of the Tourism Advisory Committee when we discuss them. I'm in favor of them primarily because with a limited number of tourist attractions, sometimes helping them build up and improve their facility is going to be something that I see will eventually allow them to grow events and build tourism. Now, that might not be the letter of the law, so that's kind of where we're looking for some clarity there, where if we can help improve a facility, it becomes a better wedding venue instead of them going over to Charlotte Hall or outside of the county into Ingleside Vineyards out in Westmoreland. So it's one of those things where can we even use some of those funds for capital to help a facility grow in the county that makes it more of a destination, or is that something that's kind of off limits?
Thank you. Mr. Veazey.
Yeah, I'm basically echoing what David said. It's kind of confusing us where some of the capital improvements of some things are approved for, say, a sound system of the Parks and Rec, or Citizen Center. Thank you very much. It's been 30 years since I've been inside. A long time ago since I went to dances there. But anyway, so approved for their system, and then a similar system for the Highest Point group was turned down. In our mind, it's the exact same thing. It's a wedding venue. It's something that will increase tourism. So I think it would be very helpful to hear from you all how you want us to spend the money. How I read the Code of Virginia, it's things that improve, get hotel, people in hotels. So that could be in the old days, that was lighting for Barnesfield for baseball tournaments. That was approved before we were here. So the code is not very clear. So we look to you to help clarify how you want it, because we advise, that's it, you all decide. So tell us how you want to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Veazey. Ms. Strauss?
Thank you. I'll echo what the other TAC board members have said. Clarification is very important, and if there are Board of Supervisor members that feel that we have not made the right decisions on that, then clarification definitely is needed. And I'll also agree with Bob that I think the number of us that are attending the meetings seems like a very good number to work with, between 4 and 6 people. That's brings different outlooks and opinions to the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strauss. Well, we have project specifications. Mr. Minor, did you want to speak on that?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Madam Chair. So I really just want to echo what the TAC is saying, and I guess I would just like to add that, this is just my opinion, but I don't see an issue with spending TAC dollars maybe on a public location. whether it's Parks and Rec or some sort of improvement to an area in Parks and Rec, right? But I guess where I draw the line is just spending money on improvements to private property, whether it's a hotel or to a venue, to some effect. I think that, you know, if we're trying to improve or trying to recruit a new business and we're trying to incentivize that business, that's a whole different outlook towards it than if we're spending tourism dollars where the state says we have to use it to enhance or to attract more visitors. It's just sort of where I draw the line and where I see a difference. So that's really the only comment I have to make on it.
All right, we were given this, Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to interject before we go down a different line so we don't have to revisit based on some of the comments that were made by the appointees. One, I can appreciate the comments that were made, wedding venues, et cetera, bringing people into hotels and visiting the county. But at some point, we can't be in a position where we're picking winners and losers of private business. Ultimately, it's a privately held business, and we could be viewed as supporting one over another. I don't think that's a position that tax dollars should be applied. Additionally, lighting like at Barnesfield sounds great, bringing in tournaments, you know, but ultimately Little League is a private entity. Are we going to use tax dollars to support Little League when they charge fees to be able to participate? So if Little League wanted to put lights in there and work with us on a joint venture, that's something I would look to explore. But as far as putting lighting to support something like that on its own, I just don't see us being able to support something like that, because then who's to say a travel league soccer team doesn't come in and ask us to support putting in sod fields, you know, somewhere else. So it's just things to consider. But I do appreciate your comments, but I just wanted to interject that before we went down a different lane. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kupka.
Sure, yeah, if you don't mind.
Sorry, Mr. Rainey, you go first.
No, that's fine, I appreciate it. Apologize if my comments came off a little aggressive. I certainly I didn't mean to disparage you if it came off that way, so I'm sorry. And I don't think there's been a lot that's come through that I looked at and said, hey, I have some concerns about this. And really what it comes down to is reaching back out to our legal counsel and asking his advice on, you know, does this hold water? You know, is this something that we feel like we could justify spending the dollars on? So I'm also not an expert on making the legal decision, and I do rely on currently Mr. Britton for helping us to make those decisions and understand that, you know, once it's decided that yes, this is legal, I really do appreciate your input and saying yes, we think this would be of value for tourism, and so we think we should spend those dollars. And so that's more what I was trying to say. Just trying to find that demarcation line, and like I said, it's not been a lot. I think been one or two in total. So I certainly didn't want to give the impression that I thought your guys are just sending everything through or anything like that. So if it did come off that way, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr.
Okay, interject on points. First to Nick's comments about spending money for, you know, capital equipment or whatnot. One case we had in mind, there was a situation where they were talking about renting portable equipment for a one-time event. And we were looking at the cost of the rental of that equipment versus installation of permanent equipment, which came to a very similar cost, and which is most cost effective and which would be allowable. So that was part of our discussion. You know, what's the best investment of the dollars that we are working with? The second thing comes to mind, and I totally appreciate Mr. Bush's comments about tax dollars. I'm concerned about those as well. But, you know, here we are told that this is a special a pot of money that's to be spent exclusively to support tourism. And so it's not a traditional tax dollar, so we're trying to define how this dedicated pot of money is to be spent.
Ms. Kupka?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So y'all are correct. The code with regard to how you can spend the money actually reads, any excess over 2% shall be designated and spent solely for tourism and travel, marketing of tourism or initiatives that, as determined after consultation with the local tourism industry organizations, that's you all, including representatives of lodging properties located in the county, attract travelers to the locality, increase occupancy at lodging properties, and, so it doesn't say or in between each one, and generate tourism revenues in the locality. So there's a three-pronged test that needs to be met from the code when making a determination as to whether it's a satisfactory use of the funds. So then with regard to public facilities, with regard to any capital improvements, while I do agree with Mr. Bush, his comments about investing in private facilities, I don't agree as far as public facilities go. I do agree with Mr. Minor. I can give you a great example. The sports tourism industry is a huge industry. I myself have a child who plays at times travel volleyball, travel soccer, and another child who plays travel baseball. And I could say for the course of those seasons, we are out of town between one or both of them, probably 3 out of 4 weekends a month. We are traveling to other places in the state, if not other places in the eastern seaboard, and we are having to spend a significant amount of money, you know, to pay in a hotel for at least 1 night, 2 nights, sometimes 3 nights, depending on the duration of the tournament. And then meals, we're eating out a lot. We're buying gas in whatever locality we're in. So for me personally, I feel like if there was a request, a proper request for not necessarily from the Little League or from, you know, a soccer league, but from our own Parks and Recreation Department, that could be justified by data saying, you know, this year, and I did it in 2017 before I started working for the county. I was the assistant tournament director for the girls' state softball tournament for the Little League, and we received one of these grants, not for capital expenditures. It was all for stuff, marketing materials, and everything we did, we put the county seal on, and, you know, sponsored by King George Little League and King George County, Virginia. So that's a good example of a way to use it. But I would also be in favor if we had, like I said, a proper proposal directly from our Parks and Recreation Department with some data to substantiate the draw it would bring to our hotels for any one of these kinds of sporting events. Sports tourism, like I said, is a huge industry, and I think there's a lot more we could do to capitalize on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So if I can, I do want to highlight on one thing Ms. Kupka just said. I agree, if Parks and Rec were to make the request, I think that's absolutely in line with the intent of what this money should be used. What I was trying to point out was, like, if Little League specifically came out and asked for lighting, and lighting was paid for, and it was under the premise that Little League had facilitated this, I don't want it to appear down the road, well, Little League's the one that facilitated getting these lights, therefore Little League has priority on utilization of these fields. Now, if Parks and Rec came and said, hey, if we get this lighting, if we had the money, and this could help us entertain or bid for a national tournament or something of that matter, totally different ballgame. So I could support, like Ms. Kupka said, if this was Parks and Rec driven, just not independently driven. And I bring that back to, we had supported some tourism dollars to the Mount Bethel Jazz Fest. I believe we lost money on that venture. That's things that we need to look at, you know. There have been other opportunities in the county that some we've supported, some we haven't. The perception could always be, we're picking the winners and losers. We're telling you if we like your event or if we don't like your event. I just think maybe those lines need to be cleaned up just a little bit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Stonehill?
The sports tourism thing is huge. I mean, I should say back in the old days, go and look at Sealston on a Saturday or a Sunday, and there's 600 cars down there for, soccer and all that kind of stuff. And down in Barnesville, where the softball tournaments are, going there, and it's standing room only. So, if I would agree with these guys, and Parks and Rec wanted to do something, that would be that would be very acceptable. And also, would like to see somebody on your all's committee that is specializing in sports. If to get somebody. I know Warren down there is more of the environmental, outdoor kind of stuff. But if there was somebody, a soccer dad, mom, coach, something to help attract some of these, especially the softball stuff, I think that would be a good idea.
Mr. Mayor? Jim? Well, when I went to VACO last year, and I'm sure people have heard me say this before, I went to several of the presentations, and those that know me know that I'm big on sports tourism. So there was a county down near Richmond, Dinwiddie County, that they took land and they built a sports complex, and their Parks and Rec department runs it, and they make a lot of money hosting baseball and soccer tournaments, and they rent them out to colleges. So it can be done, and it's very profitable, and they make about $8 million a year running this facility, and their employees run it, they built it, everything, and they won an award for it. So I know it is possible, and we could do so many things. We have how many parks? Baseball fields, soccer fields. We now have more land to build some more fields in the future, so it is something. And then I always pitch, and I've asked about it, of putting in facilities at like Sidell Brooks Park, like a picnic shelter, because we do have people come in tourism to see the native plant garden, and we have people that come and bring their children there and they don't have a place to be out of the sun, and they have to sit in their cars or even a bathroom, because there are quite a few people that do come to walk or go on the native trails. And then when the courthouse and the government building down there, more people probably will start to come over there while they're waiting to do whatever they need to do. So, I mean, that's something I look at. Does any of my colleagues have any more comments? Any from the tourism committee? Oh, okay. Hold on, let me get it. Go ahead.
That actually kind of brought a thought back to one of the meetings that we had several months ago. As the Tourism Advisory Committee, are we just advising on these, or do we have, given our roles in the community and in tourism that we play, do we have the ability to put together a funding grant for something like you had just proposed, coming from a member of TAC, as opposed to having to then go out and say, hey, I need you to put this together and put a proposal together for some funding dollars?
That is something I think we would have to, if you all agree, our legal counsel to give an opinion on. But we can direct Dr. Young. Dr. Young?
Yes, Madam Chair. Answering your question, Mr. Zabelski, currently, according to state code, that you all's role is advisory in nature, and it states specifically that the TAC advises the board on the expenditure of funding. Now, if the board, and I know that we've actually had discussions with the staff and the TAC before and explained, hey, the tourism fund isn't the TAC's, it's the board's, and the advisory committee simply makes a recommendation, whether it be a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Those applications come to the board, and the board retains the final authority on if that funding is going to be allocated or not, and that's well within their legal means. Now, if the board wanted to put together, if you all put together some type of program that you all want to fund it similar to like a business grant, small business grant that we're doing with the EDA, then you all could put together some type of proposal of that nature, put a cost associated with it, and then I would recommend that that would be taken to the board, and the board would decide, okay, yes, we'll set aside this a certain amount of money, and that'd be at the tax disposal and discretion to decide how those funds are going to be executed. But at the moment, currently, that hasn't been authorized by the board, so you all don't have that latitude at the moment.
If I can interject, there is a distinct difference between an authority, such as the Service Authority Board of Directors, and then an advisory committee. Even the Planning Commission is advisory in nature. Regardless of where these tax dollars come from, whether they're assessed from the county as far as real estate or personal property taxes, or if it comes via the meals tax, etc., it's still viewed as public dollars. So public dollars cannot be expended by appointees. Ultimately, that has to be done by the elected body, which is the Board of Supervisors. So I just wanted to put that clarity out there. Now, the EDA is an authority, and that is the difference. The EDA is not advisory in nature. They are an authority, just like the Service Authority. So I wanted to make that point of clarity. Sorry for interrupting, Dr. Young.
Mr. Barry?
Point of clarification. I'll say I don't think there's a question, at least in my mind, that it's up to the board to authorize expenditure of funds. But I think one of the questions that we had here was, can the advisory committee come up with their own ideas to advance to the board, or are simply reactive to outside
I would say,
proposals?
and that's one of the reasons why we had pointed out that, the committee really needed a strategic plan. What are your ideas? What is the path forward? What are you shooting for? What is your plan? What is your view, your mission, your vision about what you would like to get people in the public to bring to the table so that you could provide?
Thank you.
Would all my colleagues agree to that? Go ahead, Ms. Kupka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just add, though, I do want to also add that we also take the recommendation of staff. We place a good deal of weight on the recommendation of our economic development and tourism staff as well. So if you were to do something like that, we would welcome it. But obviously, we would also, look at how our staff felt about it as well when we made a final determination. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Dr. Young?
And Madam Chair, so, and as Ms. Kupka stated before, and just observing this conversation and the years of all the applications that's come across from the Tourism Advisory Committee to the Board of Supervisors, I think that we can all admit that because of that ambiguity in the code and the lack of the code defining what tourism is, there's always some creative applications that come across the desk to the TAC and then makes it to the board. But by the time that it makes it to the board is like, what is this, and what is the TAC thinking? And I think that what I would recommend to cut down on some of that confusion, that the TAC should do two things. Number one, when you all have applications come across, you all should have a requirement from the applicants, hey, provide us some type of quantifiable data on how this could potentially meet the ends that's defined in the state code, which is how is this going to increase more hotel room rentals or more people entering into the county. At least some type of forecast versus it just being a plain naked application with no justifiable data. And again, by the time it makes it to the board, without that context, is really not a lot that the board can make a decision on, because there's no hard facts or data to make a decision on. And then on the board side of the house, I would think that the board probably tonight would probably set at least a baseline of exactly what you don't want to see. Since there is ambiguity, at least state from the board to give the guidance to the TAC, hey, we don't care what comes across the desk. If it's, for example, and I don't have any say in this, or I'm not making any suggestion, but hey, we don't want to see capital improvements at all, and that way there's understanding with the TAC here tonight, and those type of applications stop coming across from the board. I think if the board gave some type of consensus on exactly what they don't want to see, and put that out to as guidance to the TAC tonight, that will be able to alleviate a lot of confusion that takes place, between the TAC and between the board and staff.
Mr. Veazey?
So I love that idea of putting it actually in our application. These are the 3 criteria. Show us how, project how you're going to meet them. So I think that's a brilliant idea. But your other statement of we're not going to accept these, don't show it to us. Do we sit on things then, or does everything get pushed up to you just with a don't approve? Or nope, we don't think this is good. We're going to not even show it to you. There's a difference there. What do you want to see the bad ones, or do you?
I'd recommend that it's in the application. Hey, these type of projects aren't even accepted.
So they don't get advanced.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying so you can advise the applicant that receives a fresh application that they know that off the bat. So it tries to discourage them from not even meeting the Board of Supervisors threshold. However, if you all do receive those applications, then I think that you have a responsibility to make that recommendation against it because it doesn't meet the board's requirements, but it still needs to go before the board because they should have visibility on all citizens' requests.
You make a decision.
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there should be a minimum threshold that you hit certain bullet points in order to move it forward, and if you don't, then it's not, or else you're going to have everybody under the sun, submitting something. I would definitely have some measurable scoring or something, and if it hits a certain threshold, then it moves forward. And going back to capital improvements, I would say we want to be careful in how we annotate that. So if it's ceiling tiles and lighting for the Citizen Center, that's capital improvements. That's something that should be done through a maintenance budget. If it's, let's say, a outdoor stage and seating at Sealston, maybe not now, but 10, 15 years down the road, Sealston, that complex was actually built out as an event complex. It was tested during the KGQ Fest we had 2 years ago. So that would be a capital improvement to the county, enhancing one of our properties, but an outdoor stage with seating could be used to host multiple venues over the years. So I would just say we need to consider those capital improvements very carefully. Thank you.
Mr. Bush, I would agree with that because I went down, I think it was Kilmonarch, that actually has one of those outdoor events. They have a stage in a gazebo, and they use it for events to host for the community. And I would see that as a benefit for tourism because people come in and they spend dollars in the area. My colleagues, anybody want to take a moment to? Okay. Any other board member questions? So one of the first things I'm hearing is a framework. So a check sheet, a guideline that would show these are the things in an application that we're really looking for. And if they're not there, that probably doesn't have a very good chance of moving forward in the process. And I would say, and I'll get my colleagues' opinion, of come up with one and then send it to us and we can see what, come to an agreement on it so that everybody is on board with it. Ms. Kupka?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it would help you all, I can give you a sample of a grant application score sheet from having been a grant writer, and also from my time with King George Education Foundation. Every year we do an innovation grant process, and we have, for each application, we have a cover sheet, a score sheet, and it is divided by sections, and each grant is awarded points based on how it meets the criteria. So I could give you a sample if that would be helpful to you all in developing one that you feel will meet your needs in judging these applications. Thank you.
What's important with that too, if somebody comes back and wants to know why they were denied, you then have this sort of an almost unbiased, here's the criteria, this is how we scored it, this is why we scored it, and it's all there on paper instead of people waiting around and wondering why it was not approved. There's a score sheet for it. So are my colleagues okay with that? Mr. Granger?
So if the score is low enough, does that mean it doesn't even come before the board then? Mm-hmm. Okay, is everyone comfortable with saying
have a
that?
threshold.
Now,
You
the only
guys
reason
come
I
up with a
bring that up is
threshold?
because there might be people who feel that they didn't get a fair shake.
Right.
And so would there be a process then for
An appeal?
appeal? I guess.
Mr. Veazey?
I would say then, that's part of our give and take with the applicants, that we say, hey, you made a 12 and you need to get a 15 to get up to the board, so here, you need to come back and here's your 3 criteria, work towards them.
So, Madam Chair, what I would suggest is let's set a threshold, a scoring, we could set a scoring system up, and there's a minimal threshold that has to be made or met. If that is not met, we do give them an appeal authority, which could, since Mr. Minor works closely with the TAC, I would make his supervisor, which is the county administrator, who works directly with the chair of the board, make the county administrator the appeal authority to overlook it, and if the county administrator supports the TAC's decision, then it simply wouldn't come before the board. That could be the appeal authority.
And then the other I would add is that an applicant, when they are denied, that they be given a conversation of why, just so there's no ambiguity, and have an opportunity to appeal or to resubmit with the information, especially if they were missing some data. Go ahead, Ms. Kupka.
So the only hesitation I have with that is that as far as an appeal goes, I would be more comfortable with what Mr. Veazey suggested, which is if they don't hit, like let's say it's 50 points, because 50 you can easily double to 100. So if they don't hit, let's say 30 is 60, that's a D, right? If they don't hit at least that, they don't move forward. So then the chairman of the TAC at the time reaches out to the applicant and says, hey, we have these certain minimum scoring threshold that you have to meet for it to go forward. We are affording you the opportunity to strengthen your application, right? And so perhaps staff could make some suggestions to the applicant on how to strengthen their application, but I kind of feel like we'd be putting our administrator in a bad spot by having him be the ultimate appeal authority. At that point, either the applicant either comes up with the goods and bumps their score up and they make it, or they just don't, and I don't feel we should put him in the position of picking the winners and losers when that's our job.
I hear you, but at some point, the appeal authority has to be outside of the TAC. So even if staff engaged and said, hey, here's how you can bump up your score, and they don't achieve that, if it's still just a nothing burger, there has to be some appeal authority outside of the TAC. So if not the county administrator, then who? And I only suggested county administrator because he happens to be the supervisor of the director of economic development and tourism. Now, the director works very closely with the TAC, which is why I was looking at putting an arm's length on that appeal authority between the TAC and going to the county administrator, because ultimately the board makes the decision, but do we want to see every single application, which is what brought us to this discussion? This is a way to where everyone doesn't make its way to the board.
Madam Chair, just offer a suggestion here. I believe our charter says that we do report to the board. However, Dr. Young, as administrator, is basically serves the pleasure of the board and helps formulate your agenda and so forth. If we provide him we provide him a report of what we found and our evaluations, I could see that things that are totally clear cut could easily go on the consent agenda. Just they're informational for the board and non-controversial because they don't meet the criteria.
Now, if I could make one other suggestion. So if we made Dr. Young, let's say, the appeal authority, ultimately he has an agenda meeting with the chairman. Regardless of who the chairman is year after year, the chairman ultimately, their charge is to set the agenda. So the chair has no other special powers. Their vote is the same as every other member, but the chairman ultimately sets the agenda. So if the county administrator briefs the chairman at the time, This was declined by the TAC. I reviewed it as an appeal authority. I support the TAC's decision. Here's the findings. Madam, Mr. Chair, whoever, do you want to put this on the agenda to bring to the full board? At that point, I would leave that at the discretion of the chair. I have no problem with that.
How'd you go around and get consensus?
Well, I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Baird said. I think it's important for us to at least know of the proposals. And so I do like the idea of having some kind of report or something that I know like community development gives us a report, like monthly or so, and it comes at the end of the board packet. And so something that just maybe would list, hey, these ones just didn't make it. You know, no action is needed, but just for situational awareness, so we know what did come in. And so those people know that, hey, everyone has seen it. It's not like it was hidden or something. It's out there and it's available to see. So, but it didn't make the cut, like Mr. Barrett said. It's pretty clear this one just didn't pass muster. So,
I have no problem with that. Mr. Stone?
I like that idea that Mr. Veazey had. And also being able to throw it back and say, hey, you need to get a little bit more information in the packet for everybody to, if you want to get this up, there's a lot of things there that, if you don't get it right the first time, to get it thrown back and say, hey, you need to kind of, muscle up a little bit, get some more information. And then in regards to bringing it back to Dr. Young, he has so much going on right now anyways. He's like one-armed paper hanger. But I think that even in Mr. Minor could be the appeal authority. He's just one level away from the TAC, and his office is supposed to be the expert in tourism anyways. So, I would be fine with having Mr. Minor be the appeals, but if we get one.
Ms. Kupka? All right. My only suggestion is maybe even just for those who appeal, so we don't stress the staff, is just Dr. Young brings it, Mr. Minor brings it to Dr. Young, Dr. Young brings it to the chairwoman or chairman, and we put it on the agenda for an appeal and hear it, and then then it becomes very objective. Is everybody okay with that?
Can you repeat it?
And then it doesn't task you, Dr. Young. So if there is someone who does an appeal, they come to the TAC, and then they come to Mr. Minor, who then brings it to Dr. Young, and then he would come. So if it was during my time, and say, Ms. Bender, we have an appeal. Can we put this on the next agenda? And then it goes on the agenda, and they get to make their case to the board. And then it doesn't task your department. And
So basically what you're saying, Madam Chair, is like what Mr. Bush said. So at the discretion of the chair, it is heard by the full Board of Supervisors or not, is how we're leaving.
because if say it is a 50-point thing and they got a 5, then it's not, So but if it was 45 or something, or that it was just confusion.
could we still have that be part of like a report if?
Yes.
Because I think that's important, obviously, to see as well.
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Meyer, and then I saw you, Mr. Veazey.
Yes, Madam Chair. So I have notes of everything that everyone has basically done, and I have the process down. And I was telling Dr. Young that what I'll do is write up a formal process that we all can basically adopt, and then as well as just sort of recording what it is, just how we move forward is just making sure I have the proper process down with everything down. So, oh yes, and then including it in my economic development report. Monthly, essentially.
Because it would also show those on the outside too, of how many grants we get, how many are accepted, how many are, and so it shows that we are doing something with the tourism dollars and how it's being spent.
Yes, absolutely. So applications are extremely funny. So last month we had hardly any. Next week we'll have to review at least 4. So it's just sort of how the flow of the project. So.
Right, I understand, especially during this time. Mr. Veazey, you also had a question?
No, I'm in support of your process flow. Nick is already at our meetings already, so he's just, the one more step, and you all are going to hear about it if we turn down a thing for it anyway. So the process will go forward, and it's just a great idea to have it written down to help explain to the citizens. So, thank you.
What other clarification do we want to set? Well, we have this tourism strategic plan is just the outline right now, correct, for the vision and the path forward?
Yes, ma'am. So what I've essentially done is, at you guys' request, is just lay out an outline. The number of meetings, what we're supposed to achieve in those meetings, and then what the deliverables are at the end of these meetings. So a strategic plan, a marketing plan, and then essentially a budget, a baseline budget that we will come up with and how we're going to spend that money.
Okay.
So,
My colleagues?
If you guys have any questions about it, or if you guys would like to review it, I'm more than happy to go over it.
My colleagues have, do you want to take a second and I'll hear from the tourism committee? Ms. Kupka?
I just wanted to say thank you for doing this. I read through it online in the email you sent us today, and it looks like a good framework for you to be able to advance through the process and engage all of the stakeholders as well. So thank you very much for your time on this.
Anybody on the tourism committee like to make a?
So one of the things that I'd like a little bit more clarity on, and I've tried to get, and I've gotten conflicting answers. I'd like to see some of the historical data as to how much money is coming into TAC every year, so that we can kind of help better prepare our budget, understand what we're expecting, what we have, what we should have, and things like that. And I'd also like to know how often that gets funded, because we've seen some snapshots at our meetings, but I haven't seen funding draws coming in, even though I know that money comes from the occupancy tax that hotels bring, and I know those checks go to the county every month. I had naturally assumed those funds were separated out every month. I've heard it's twice a year. I've heard it's once a year. I don't have a direct answer on that. But I think one of the things that will help us better prepare and plan is knowing what we have coming in.
Dr. Young, would you like to?
Isn't that a quarterly installment, Dr. Young?
I believe that it's quarterly, and
Yes.
don't hold me to this because I've held lots of discussions about this, but I believe that it's withheld by the state, and then the state makes a quarterly disbursement into to the county and then into the
Why would it be withheld by the state? Just
I
out of
believe-
curiosity, because I know the checks go to the county.
Then I may be mistaken, because I know some of the taxes, like the sales tax that comes out, and the state will do a disbursement. So I may be mistaken, but I know that it's multiple disbursements. It's not like just once a year implementation into the transient occupancy account.
Right, because I know
or the tourism fund.
I know, I believe I believe TAC gets 60% of the occupancy tax that the hotels charge. The hotels charge a 5% occupancy tax on every guest room. So basically 3% of that 5 should be going to TAC, is how I understood it. I don't know if that's actually correct.
Those tax rates are assessed by the state, and those payments are made to the state. The state retains those funds, and then they make quarterly distributions to localities, is
Okay.
my understanding on how this works.
So even though we're sending that occupancy tax check every month to the county treasurer?
Because you're sending a whole number, you're sending the entire revenue that is assessed.
Okay.
And then the state does their audit process, and they send their dividend or our share on a quarterly basis.
Okay, that I did not know. Thank you.
That was my understanding. I could be wrong, but I asked the same line of questioning you did about a year ago, and that was the explanation I had received.
Ms. Kupka?
So, Mr. Zabelski, we actually had the county attorney look into this for us over the summer, and in July, he reported to us. So I have all of the information you're asking for historically for the last 3 years right here, as well as the current fund balance, and I am happy to give this to you all. And I'll also read to you from his memo, and I would note the memo is not anywhere marked privileged and confidential attorney-client communication. It is not marked such. Collection and accounting. The Commissioner of the Revenue collects all TOT, transient occupancy tax is what TOT stands for, funds and posts them to the business accounts and the TAC account. The funds are then delivered to the treasurer. The tourism fund is tracked as an enterprise fund in the county budget. All revenue and expenditures are followed by the finance department. See revenues and expenditures for the last 3 years attached. Before an expenditure is brought to the board, it is reviewed by the TAC and county staff with a recommendation to approve or disapprove, yada, yada. I won't read the rest of it, but here.
And Mr. Zabelski, regarding a report, we can definitely generate a quarterly report, from the finance department, and Nick can bring that to the meeting for the TAC.
Do you have a follow-up question? You want to just take a minute to look at it? Does anybody else on the TAC have a question, concern?
I have neither, no concerns. I think that, if we as a group here today agree with the general outline of the strategic plan, I certainly would like to have the TAC and Nick dive deeper into it and start fleshing it out a little bit and make sure we're moving in accordance with the overall desires of the board as we move forward to develop it. We definitely need some time to dig into it.
Right. Mr. Veazey?
I was just going to echo the support of having a strategic plan, knowing we're from our previous years, we're getting 100 or 80,000, 100,000 a year. Then it helps us assign a value to, the people coming in and asking for money to say, we got 6 people asking for 20,000 and we only have 100,000. We know we can come back to say, hey, we need to drop that down to make sure we don't go over our assumed budget, because these are all assumed. We're hoping that we get the same amount of money the whole year, and hotels, I'm sure David can tell us, they ebb and flow with the season. So it really helps to have the historical data and having an annual budget for us to not go over. No problem going under, but we don't want to go over. So I love the idea of a strategic plan and having at each meeting, letting us know, getting a report from the treasurer to know what's going on so that we can budget it, appropriately to the applications.
Mr. Zabowski, do you have?
Basically, if I could, Ms. Kupka, if I could get a copy of this, just so I can kind of look a little more in depth and understand it a little bit better. And I guess one of the other thoughts I had is kind of what is the long-term goal of this? Some of the things that we talked about earlier, a potential stage or like amphitheater type thing at Sealston, obviously is going to be a much higher ticket. So are we looking to grow this fund to do higher ticket things? Are we looking to spend 60 to 80% of it every year and then continue to build? Kind of what are the long-term goals of how you all see the funding?
Mr. Bush?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ultimately, I would like to see King George residents get a return on their investment. So ultimately, the county is growing with that. Tourism would actually help us out. So the more development we have, as far as like commercial bringing in money, we need that. But if you bring in tourism and you're bringing in those revenues, well, that kind of offsets that need. Eventually, I would like to see tourism grow. I mean, you look at communities like Middleburg. They're very rural, but When people go there, that's like horse country USA. You know, they have tons of tourism things. We have things here in the county that maybe we can enhance. We have the trail. We have Caledon State Park. I mean, we have all kinds of things. Hopefully, after the bridge is done and we get to reclaim some of Wayside, we've discussed some options with the property we get back from the state. I'm not talking about the home site. I'm talking about the property. There may be things we could do there. We have things to do, and that's where the TAC comes in. You're the guys in that industry. We're talking head politicians ultimately. I mean, we're residents, we care, but ultimately, that's your business. You're in this daily. So your recommendations weigh heavily. So your insight into how can we do things like that, amphitheater, you know, is it possible to have an outdoor concert in King George? It sounds good, but would anybody actually come? Tournaments at Sealston, sounds great. Will people actually come? Or is it just going to be a bunch of kids from Stafford and King George that ultimately go home at night? You know what I mean? So it's those things. I got no problem spending the money to make an investment as long as King George County realizes a return on that investment. And ultimately, that's what I see the tax mission being, is finding a way to take those dollars and make it valuable or give a return to all of the county. That's my vision. Thank you.
Mr. Granger?
I think that's some good points from Mr. Bush. I would, personally, I don't think there's a need to hold a huge base of dollars and to try to build that up necessarily. I'd say, as Mr. Bush said, a return on investment. And so if looking at the applications as they come in and it makes sense and you're like, wow, we think this will be of value, I'd say let's spend the dollars because it makes sense at that time. It might be nice to have a little bit of a base in case there's something that's kind of big that comes up, but, you know, I'm not hard and fast on that. I'd rather, if we got something now, you know, let's take advantage of it now and hopefully, you know, it'll bring in more tourism and more dollars and we'll just build it up more.
Any other?
Yeah, you guys are the experts in your fields down there, and, you know, get together, find out how you would grow outdoor stuff and how would you grow a hotel and, you know, how would you grow everything that you all are in, and, you know, then come to us and say, all right, well, here are the ideas. So we're really relying on you guys as the ideas, you know, and to have a big fund of money. You know, I would in agreement with these guys, and I don't really think that should be an important thing, but just, you know, how do we grow this? How do we make, you know, King George more of a tourism spot to bring people here? I mean, we have lots of stuff, like they said, you know, we have all the outdoor stuff and we have the water and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, come up with some ideas and let's get going on bringing some tourism here.
Ms. Gupka?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Zabelski, that is yours to keep. If we can either make copies of that, or I can email it, or staff can email it to Mr. Baird, or email it to the rest of the committee so that everyone on the Tourism Advisory Committee has the same information. But that was when Mr. Britton reported to us at the July 14th Board of Supervisor meeting that as of that date, the TAC fund balance was approximately $635,192.08. And so there are some funds that have come out since then. Obviously, we have a couple more 300th anniversary events down the pike that we've probably put out the money for the fireworks since then and so forth. But I agree with my colleagues that we should keep maybe couple $100,000 in there, but we need to start seeing a return on the investment, and hopefully with having this marketing plan come together, this tourism strategic plan, the marketing plan, we'll be able to do that more successfully. We'll have a plan for how to spend the money that does do what all of us agree needs to happen. And you'll note also, it says in there $92,000 for each year. That's a guideline. That's not how, now that there's a couple $100,000 going in every year. That's just kind of the guideline that staff works off of, so that if there is a shortfall, which we're going to have a shortfall this year, I'm sure, because of COVID, but that's kind of a minimum kind of, amount of money that you guys can probably count on each year without, overspending and busting the bank if there is a shortfall. So, thank you.
I mean, that was part of the reason why I know my time on the board, and Mr. Bush too, is that there was a lot of gray area, and this summer we did get clarification from Mr. Britton about exactly how much is in the fund, how much can we spend, what can we spend it for, and that's where he came up with the memo and the financial documents. I have a suggestion for the path forward is because I know it's going to take a little time to go over this packet, come up with a budget, come up with all that information, and maybe the sample grant application and criteria and everything, is to bring us something at the turn of the year, is to come with a strategic plan, a finalized strategic plan, a finalized grant application, checklist, budget, and I think a budget would be really cool and even maybe coming up with like a 5-year plan of, I'm going to give the event venue as an example. Is we know this is something we see as maybe getting us tourism dollars. We want to maybe have a little bit in the fund, so at the end of 5 years, we could afford to purchase the stage or whatever. I'm just using that as an example. Something like that, and give it to us at the first meeting of the new year after our organizational meeting. So that would be the second meeting. What do my colleagues think about that?
Madam Chair, can I just, for a point of clarification, can we consult with staff to make sure that deadline works for them? Because yes, this is the Tourism Advisory Committee, but their role is advisory, and it really, in my mind, is professional staff's responsibility to draft the strategic plan. So we need our staff to be able to hit that benchmark, most importantly.
I know, I was just, but they have a big role because they are the experts also of each of their industries, so they bring a lot of knowledge. But Mr. Minor?
Yes, Madam Chair. So I think what I propose is that once I come back, I can at least have working with the TAC first is having an implementation plan, and then having essentially a 5,000, height view of what the timeline is going to be, a very high level timeline. So what we can do is lay out all the meetings, all the public meetings, the time frame for them, when we're going to schedule them, and then I can come back to you guys with when we can expect to be completed. But first we have to sort of narrow down, do we agree on the type of meetings we're going to have, the focus groups that we're going to have, the surveys, when are we going to have, what are the dates that we can have those on, and then once we lay out all the dates that we can have them on, then I can give you guys a projected time and when we could see it completed. So we just have to lay all that out first, essentially.
So when do you think you can bring that timeline before us?
Well, our next meeting is, our next TAC meeting, ma'am, is next week. So we could maybe hammer out a lot of it then, but probably I would say November is when we could probably complete that.
Yeah, it's fine. Any other thoughts, concerns? Who's a good staff? That's right. Mr. Veazey?
So the one thing I'm hearing a lot of is, okay, no capital improvements, but then the next thing out of your mouth is, let's go and build this giant stadium or whatever. So that, so it obviously has to be on county property. And then you want us to, get that budget out there, but it's all grant proposals from citizens. So there's several different competing ideas.
I'll tell you
here.
personally, and my colleagues can interject, is we see the tourism committee to be more robust. And you're the expert, the people who are out there in the community, you bring each of your talents to the table. Mr. Minor is one person, he's also the EDA director, and he has all of his hats, using it to help clarify a vision and a mission of bringing this kind of business into the county and promoting it. And we do have a lot of county facilities that can be used in that to bring hotel dollars in, and maybe somebody go, I love King George, so now I want to buy a house here, or they go down and they purchase food from our restaurants. You know, it brings it all in, and we can help facilitate that. What do my colleagues feel? Mr.
So
Bush?
I would like to, we need to draw the distinct difference. So when I was talking about capital improvements, I was speaking of ceiling tiles or lighting or something in an existing county facility, okay? Something that should be accounted for in a maintenance budget. When I was talking about capital improvements to enhance tourism, I'm talking about something new, like lighting or an outdoor amphitheater or something that enhances a property that you could come before the Board of Supervisors and say, this doesn't exist at X site that the county owns. We would like to put this infrastructure enhancement, whatever you want to call it, at this county-owned site. And this is how, by doing this, we would be enhancing the county's tourism capabilities. I don't view that as the typical capital improvement. You know, adding on a storage closet or buying a shed for Parks and Rec at the Citizen Center or something like that, that doesn't add up. Doing something else like what we talked about, you know, putting a stage at Sealston or something, for example, that does. So that's the, I know it's a little mixing it and it's kind of a gray area, but that's what I was trying to articulate as far as the difference between capital improvements and then something that should be accounted for as general maintenance, you know, or a storage shed or something of that effect.
You go first, David.
Well, Mr. Veazey has first.
So correct me if I'm wrong, so we are supposed to take applications from citizens, but unless it's for advertising or some ephemeral expense, only capital improvements can happen on county property. Am I wrong?
Well, I can only speak for myself. Mm-hmm. I would never use public dollars to enhance privately owned property. Right. Now, there's nothing that prohibits the TAC, and in fact, what I would vision your guys' role is not just taking applications from other people, but what is your vision? And the TAC come up with something and say, hey, we would like to see something of this magnitude in the next 5 years. In order to achieve that, we need this in place, and it would take you building whatever. I kind of see that as a TAC role, not just simply being a facilitator of applications for whatever dog and pony show or whatever. You know what I mean?
I would agree with that. That's how I see is using your expertise to come up with a mission and a vision for the tourism of this county and assisting Mr. Miner and his staff. What are your thoughts?
In the beginning of the meeting, I thought I heard you guys say that we can't come up with applications, though. Was that I misheard that? As a committee, we're only supposed to accept applications. That's what I thought we heard earlier in the beginning.
Mr. Granger and then Ms. Cupper.
I didn't mean to give that impression if it was me. I don't know if it's necessarily an application, but as well, I mean, you're citizens as well. So I think it makes sense for you guys to be able to bring to the board, you know, some kind of vision and say, you know, this is what we think. We think this would be of value, and it's not necessarily an individual events project, but you're like, hey, this will help bring in more people to come into the hotels and to come in to eat at the restaurants, and we think it's of value, and there's going to be a big return on investment. And so, you know, I think you should feel free to bring those kinds of ideas and to develop them. So please don't hesitate. Now, if you got some great ideas, I'm always willing to entertain them.
Ms. Kupka?
Yes, I agree. I don't want you to think that you, the TAC, have to fill out your own TAC grant application to try to get that to happen, I think is where maybe there's some confusion, is we don't think you need to do that. Just work with staff to develop a proposal, and whether that's, hey, you're going to bring us a PowerPoint presentation and some data that justifies it and a cost estimate. I don't have a problem with that. We would love to hear from you. Don't think that you need to do your own grant application. Yeah.
Right, like working with Parks and Rec, if that's who the entity is. But it's using your talent and expertise to enhance.
So, well, like I said earlier, Sealston, that sports complex was actually built out as an events complex, okay? Kind of like a fairgrounds in Fredericksburg. That's an asset and a tool at your disposal. If you wanted to plan something like the KGQ Fest that they had 2 years ago, or say the Jazz Fest they had at Mount Bethel, but you wanted to hold something similar out there, that's something that you could do, and you could articulate, hey, this could enhance tourism. The TAC could actually sponsor an event. That's things that you could do, in my mind.
Go ahead, Ms. Strauss.
And the people who would work at this event, if we came up with this event, would be county staff? Or would that be us? Or that would be who? I understand, but that's also part, if you're going to come up with an idea, you've got to be able to have the people that are going to help you implement it and pull everything off.
I would say in the planning stages of whatever you got, you would always be able to find interested parties, solicit volunteers, community service hours. There's a whole plethora of things we could tap into.
Mr. Biner, you were going to make?
Retired sheriff's deputies.
So Dee, in response to that, I think the way that I've sort of approached, since I've been at the county, is that I've told anybody who submitted an application to sort of treat the county as its sponsor, right? So what is the county getting in return for their money? So show us how we're going to be marketed, show us where you're going to spend the money, and tell us what we're going to get in return of it. And if they're a private entity, or if they're a civic organization or some sort of nonprofit, they know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that we're a sponsor, because we're investing our money and then we want to see a return on our investment. So show me how you're going to work with the hotels, show me how you're going to work with the state park, or show me how you're going to work with this venue in order to enhance King George. So it doesn't necessarily need to be us working at the venue. If that is the case, if it is a county-sponsored event, obviously my department or Parks and Rec or whoever will be involved. But I think whoever is preparing that application should have all that sort of laid out before it even comes to us. Does that make sense?
Ms. Strauss?
But we don't have to write an application if we come up with an idea. We just have to present an idea with all of the pertinent details. Is that what I just, Warren, did I just hear that?
I would think also to just clarify, colleagues, and help guide them to how the process, whoever the entity comes to the table.
Okay, no. No. When an entity writes a grant to us, then
Correct.
that's a whole separate thing. The other piece that you all were talking about, I don't think I misheard this, is that you want this robust group, TAC, to also not only review these grants, but also, because of our talents and abilities, be able to come up with tourism ideas and then float those ideas to the board with all of the pertinent information that would go along with. Did I hear that correctly?
That's what I would think. I mean, if they're appointed.
Okay, I did hear that correctly. So that's where my question came of, okay, when we have these wonderful ideas, that's where I was talking about who's doing all this stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I think as the points being made is, as we come up with the ideas, we also need to come up with suggestions or ideas as to how it would be implemented. It could be by partnership of various county civic organizations. It could be by, the school system. It could be by many different groups, but, we would certainly have to identify the organizational and implementing entities.
Work in partnership with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it more as, fairs, art and wine festivals, something like that, with businesses who are going to bring tax dollars, and that's the return. So I don't see it. The Fall Festival is sort of in between because it's both. It's civic organizations and businesses, selling products at the event. But I would see us more as trying to come up with a new, whatever, Potomac River Day or something, where we set up the venue on county property with some improvements to make that venue better. And then we bring in outside businesses to then run and make money, and everybody's happy.
Yes.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
But the one thing I would state is most of our grants are for, a sign, pay for, flyers for my new business or something of that nature. So it's going to be a shift in
Thinking, so you got to rebrand
to our
what
applicants are going to have to.
Yeah, we have to rebrand what the
understand that.
tourism committee is, but I think it would be a benefit, is my opinion, to the whole county as a whole and all of the businesses that, could benefit from it. Knowing the tourism committee is just not applications, it's a bigger, broader vision of what the county could be. Because a lot of counties in Virginia, Tazewell County included, that's how they survive, is off the tourism dollar and using the assets they have. And we have a lot of assets. Do you guys have any other concerns, thoughts? Mr. Minor, Dr. Young? My colleagues? I just have one more thing to bring up, and Dr. Young, I just sent it to you, and I don't know if this is time sensitive. We have to address it. Oh, Mr. Stone, I'm sorry. Apologize.
It's okay, I know you're on a roll. I just I'm looking at members here, and I see that there are 2 gaps, and we did talk about, how many people were on that, and I know we addressed it just briefly at the beginning, but is there any thoughts of filling these other 2 open spots?
What were the titles on it, Mr. Stonehill, that are open?
Well, I mean, Mr. Smith is gone, and Mr. Cox has been a no-show, so those are 2 gaps in there.
And Mr. Smith was from the chamber, correct?
Correct.
So we're represented from the chamber, and then Mr. Cox.
I think Cox was arts, maybe?
Or outdoor recreation.
Yeah, he was parks and outdoor events. He runs his own race.
Well, I know we could put out our next board meeting, we could, people interested in the community who represent those kind of industries, and you can put out your feelers to see if we can fill those other 2 positions. So somebody from the chamber obviously would be somebody from the chamber, and then sports or recreational. Good. Dr. Young, did you see what I sent you? It was sent to me just before we got here. So I want to bring this up, and I sent it to Dr. Young to send to all my colleagues. I got a letter from VACO about, in its Senate, it's a budget item 372E, and it is about tipping fees on landfills. And so since this is, I'm sure, very time sensitive, I wanted to ask my colleagues if we wanted to send a letter in support of VACO's opposition to this budget proposal. This would set a tax from the state on the landfills.
Yes.
And it would directly affect us.
Yes, I would like to send a letter.
Just take a second and check your, does the tourism committee want to adjourn while we're discussing this so that you can?
Yes. Gentlemen, anything further? I'll accept a motion to adjourn the tourism committee.
I make a motion to adjourn the tourism committee work session with the Board of Supervisors.
Do I have a second?
Second it?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. The tourism committee, advisory committee is adjourned.
Thank you very much for your time and coming here and your efforts. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Did you? Thank you, Mr. Minor. Yes. Yeah, this just was sent to me before I got here. So I have a consensus from the board to send the letter, Dr. Young, in support of that. Thank you very much, board. Can I have a motion to adjourn this work session?
I move to adjourn until Thursday, September 24th at 5:30 at Company 1.
Any discussion? All those in favor?